Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt. Als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht. Komm dir entgegen.
Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. This is the main show. I'm Manu, and today I'm not joined by Stefan Piankowski because he is out partying it up at Früh in Köln with Bayer Leverkusen. But that's okay because I got a great replacement. Seb Stafford-Bloor from The Athletic. Seb, we just hung out. Not even been that long. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. In the last 7 days, I'm still well. We actually managed to delay the recording of the podcast by quite an impressive sort of 25 minutes catching up.
Yeah.
That's 6 days worth of catching up. So,
6 days.
Yeah.
Literally saw each other like last Monday in Frankfurt. But yeah, we have, you know what? Before we even go into all the finer details and catching up even further, let's get paid first, and then we can dive into this podcast because we have a ton to discuss this week. So let's get the business end out of the way first before we do anything else. This episode of the Gegenpressing podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. The last of the major pro sports leagues is off and rolling, and college basketball is ready to go as well. BetOnline remains your top spot for all your live betting actions and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, and NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions. All the hoops betting action, along with every sport available at your fingertip with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and remember to use our promo code BELIEVE, that is BLEAV, BELIEVE, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. Yeah, Seb, the last time we were hanging out, which seems like ages ago, but really is just 6 days, was in Frankfurt. We were at the Klassiker together. Of course, we recorded that post-game show with Matt Ford, who sadly couldn't make it today, but he'll be back on the podcast soon, obviously. And then we both took in the NFL game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Miami Dolphins at the Deutsche Bank Park in Frankfurt. I want to kind of start here because this has been fascinating. We both have been writing about this. I know that you did an article for The Athletic. I did something for Forbes yesterday. Actually, I did 2 pieces for Forbes already. And there's a third and a fourth in planning. I find this really fascinating because we've got to sit down with several people that are involved in the NFL Germany games, right? We spoke to Lara Krug from Kansas City Chiefs. She's the chief of marketing. She sits on the advisory board, if I'm not mistaken. We spoke to Per Naubert from the DFL, Bundesliga International, right? Refresh my mind. Who else did we chat to about this?
We spoke to, I think, Tim Bennell from, I think that's Tim's second name, from Tim Bunnell, from ESPN, who is very, very interesting about Goal Arena and kind of broadcasting innovation, particularly with a mind on the Bundesliga's international audience. That was very, very interesting. We kind of had a lot of conversations among ourselves as well, about the way forward. And you know what? When I went back through the audio, I remember
there's lots of audio.
Yeah, quite a lot of audio. Yeah. I think you kind of have to distance yourself from your own opinion. I think because I'm certainly of the mind that I would like the Bundesliga to stay as it is forever, just in its current form, and never to worry about what it has to do outside Germany. which is really, really strange because I'm an immigrant and this is not my home country. I moved here and I've become a sort of a gatekeeper, which is terrible. how British. Gatekeeping somebody else's country. But then you also have to temper that with your understanding of what global football looks like and what, unfortunately, the Premier League has done to the global football marketplace, and how many different questions it's asking all the other leagues in the world, and ultimately nobody has any answers for those questions, really. You and I have been in enough meetings where we've posed various versions of this question, and no one has a satisfactory answer about what you do about the Premier League, in inverted commas. And so learning about some of these things and some of the ways in which, so behind the curtain, Manu, when I wrote my article, I knew where the sensitivities were going to occur with the Bundesliga audience. And I knew the moment I started talking about what the Bundesliga could learn from the NFL, like that big alarm was going to go off in people's head, be like, no, we don't want monster trucks and cheerleaders. And, and I was like, what it refers to is really kind of marketing techniques and how you develop brands in local regions and that kind of stuff. But it was it's very interesting. How did you find it? How did you find writing about it?
I'm hugely fascinated by it, and I think the conversations that we had with one another, I think that became quite clear, right? I live in North America. I still spend about a good 4 or 5 months a year in Germany, but I live here. This is my home, and I do actually go to quite a few NFL games in the United States, right? Because it's the Seattle Seahawks are just literally around the corner from where I live in Victoria. And I find this, so I'm quite critical of the NFL in general, and always have been. And so when I first heard this, every single alarm bell in my head went off, as you can imagine. But I have to say that the arguments that were made were quite convincing in that Germans love NFL. We were at the game. We saw it, right? And it's also, the first touchdown happens and they go to replay, and I do the chant "Scheiß DFB," right? Because it just doesn't catch on at all. Because like the same people that would shout that at a Bundesliga game would not think about doing that in an NFL game, because it's such a different experience.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
Which then made me think, okay, well, because it's such a different experience, I actually think that they are not competitors at all. They won't be, because like 90% of the time, they don't even play at the same time, right? And I do think that the NFL has fully saturated their market in the United States. They're at a very high level, but they can't go any higher than this. There's just simply no more TV revenue you can add. If they want to grow, they have to do it abroad. And Germany is the largest market in Europe, right? It's the richest and largest economy in Europe. So where do you go? You go to Germany, right? And they're the same in the UK. You have to go abroad to grow. They're not going to compete with the Bundesliga in Germany. There's just no chance. The Bundesliga in Germany is what the NFL is in the US. So you piggyback on a successful brand here, right? And look for Dobner to kind of grow. And the Bundesliga is doing kind of the reverse. And I've seen some of the numbers now. I'm not ready yet to publish them because I have to go through them, and they're kind of like at the early stage. But Frankfurt and Bayern Munich both received an enormous boost from just having the game at their own facilities, right? And so we always talk about, okay, how can you make the Bundesliga more popular in the US, where the Premier League is king in terms of soccer behind Liga MX, right? We have to remember Liga MX is by far the biggest. But you do it by jumping on a brand that's already established and is present in the US market on television 24/7, and you do it in a way that where you cooperate with something. You can't do it with the Premier League, obviously they're a competitor, right? But NFL isn't. And I think that's a really clever way of being kind of like a Dobner, and also creating some really fun content that can really help. You have the crossover content, like last year, for example, with Bayern Munich in the States. They did like jersey swaps of Kansas City Chiefs, which is their partner club, right? You can do like kickoff events where like soccer players try to kick a field goal and all that sort of stuff. I think it's actually quite smart. And it's in a way where you do not necessarily, because you need to stay organic. You need to be your own brand still, right? Otherwise, what's the point of trying to sell it? You're actually doing it in a way where you benefit from an American brand without selling yourself out.
Really tricky though.
Really tricky. No, absolutely.
One of the things I've learned is, and I'm still learning it really, but I've come from the kind of I suppose in sports terms, the capitalist center of the world in the Premier League. And there's a standard for what is and what is not acceptable commercially. And also there are various degrees of evil, in inverted commas, in the Premier League in terms of, if RB Leipzig was in the Premier League, it would be like the 12th worst thing about English football, right? Rather than the worst. So I've come to a different country and encountered a different attitude towards commercialism and a high level of sensitivity. And so when you talk about things like crossover events and fun and piggybacking on other brands, it gets people's backs up immediately. And I found one of the really interesting things was we also spent some time with Carsten Kremer, the co-managing director of Borussia Dortmund, obviously. And one of the things he talked about, and in a way it's kind of, it's almost a contradiction in terms, is that the selling point of BVB is locality, right? And the geography and the rural region and Dortmund, the town, and the Westfalenstadion and everything about it, okay? But then he also talked about the importance of going abroad. And to me, that's such an interesting contradiction, because what you're selling abroad is locality back in Germany. And I don't quite know how that works. I'm fascinated. It's not that I don't think it can. I'm really intrigued by whatever mechanism it is that allows people to buy into not Borussia Dortmund, the football team, and, in previous years, Erling Haaland or Jude Bellingham or Jadon Sancho, whoever else, Marco Reus, but the idea of being a Dortmund fan, which is really what Carsten Kremer is talking about when he speaks of these things. And German football to me is like, in terms of, it just seems a lot closer to its community than anything I experienced in the Premier League. In England, the idea of community belongs to antiquity. You sort of antiquated football ideas, like sort of back during when there were Corinthian ideals and shirts used to have laces. It's a root, but it's not really active in the club's present day. It pretends that it is, but it isn't. It doesn't. Premier League clubs are for sale for whoever wants to pay the highest amount for a ticket. They're kind of indifferent to it. Whereas in Germany, you have this idea of not just regional identity, but different forms of regional expression too. So if you sit in I'm lucky enough to go to Bundesliga games most weekends, and there's always something. There are big kind of macro protests, DFB, DFL, whatever the current issue is. But there are also things which are important to people locally. And so I just wonder how easy it is to grasp those things from abroad. And this seems to be the key in growing the Bundesliga, which is important, is allowing people to understand kind of those dynamics and the function of the Bundesliga and how important it is on a kind of a really deep level. And I'm not smart enough to know the answer to that question, but it's really interesting.
It's a tough sell.
Yeah.
I actually think that, I lived in the UK for some time as well. And, now being in North America, where North America really is, it's a Canada and the United States, right? If you want to include Mexico, that's fine too. But it's also the province of British Columbia, the state of Washington, these are the two closest ones. That's why I'm naming them, with their own little regionalisms, which is actually very similar to Germany, right? That Germany is a country of many countries. So you can say the same about Canada and United States individually. And I think that is something that you can sell to North Americans in some ways. the US in particular has a very strong German heritage. That is something that you can sell as well. NFL is tricky because NFL is obviously quite corporate, even though they try to pretend that they're socialist. Obviously, their system is it's very competitive, which is great. But it's also about maximizing profit, right? Which is a fine line that you have to walk. And I mean, it's the same line that the Bundesliga walks in many ways as well. But you can, college football has that same sense of community than the Bundesliga does, because like once you went to a college, you're always part of that alumni group, right? And you always support that team no matter what. So that if you can tap into that a little bit. And I think too, what you mentioned about Borussia Dortmund, I thought it was really interesting. You could see the struggle that Carsten Kramer was facing with this, because he said like, we would never have an NFL game at the Signal Iduna Park, and then he named all the reasons why not. But then he also said on tape that if I asked that question in 5 or 7 years again, maybe his answer would be different. And we do know that the Seahawks were there, and they did have discussions, right? But I also know that the moment they announce something like that, you can just know what happens at the yellow wall.
Well, I found it really interesting when we were, there was, I forget which meeting it was, which conversation it came from, but we were having a conversation, I think it was with Per. And we were talking about the Super Cup, and we were talking about Christian Seifert's never ever comment from all those years ago about, a Bundesliga game migrating outside Germany. And we were having a conversation very much in the abstract about the Super Cup being somewhere else. And there was a moment where Per he talked about, well, maybe this isn't such a never ever situation. And then I listened back to the audio, and he very quickly corrects himself and says, well, there's nothing on the table. We're not talking about anything at all. And it's like, I don't blame him one little bit, because it's an area of such sensitivity. And also, it's the first domino, Manu, right? Like the Super Cup goes abroad, and all of a sudden
Bayern would move it abroad right away.
Yeah.
We have Andreas Jung on tape from the Super Cup when we were both there, where he said we should play this abroad. And then we have Carsten. I interviewed Carsten Kramer in San Diego, and then obviously he underlined this again when we were there this last weekend. No, you're not moving that abroad. So you have the two biggest clubs in Germany at quite opposite positions right there already, and that makes it really difficult.
I think I got a lot of time for Carsten Kramer. I think I could speak to him all day. He's such an interesting, forthright person, and he's, again, sorry for the comparison to English football, but he's an executive who thinks about what he's saying. He thinks about what you've asked him, and he gives you a response to that question, rather than, he doesn't just bat you away as kind of is the tendency back in the UK. And whether you agree with him or not, I've got a lot of time for that kind of, that openness of discussion, I guess. But it's also, you have this very narrow operating threshold parameter, I guess. If you're someone in that situation, like you have these objectives, and you have this kind of this gap to Bayern Munich, and you have the need to grow the brand, and yet you have these constraints which mean you must never compromise an identity in pursuit of commercial growth. And I'm fully support that. I'm absolutely on the fan side with that. I couldn't agree more. But it's interesting to watch, like you say, someone within that situation trying to kind of juggle all of those ideological balls all at the same time. And so it's very interesting.
It's really hard because, at the same time, maybe final point on this, because before we move to the actual games, but you have two clubs that in Germany that have, I think of St. Pauli and Dortmund here, that have a very strong brand that is very organic and very different than the other clubs, right? Dortmund is very working class, that industrialization of the Ruhr and all that sort of stuff. The Millantor obviously being located inside one of Hamburg's seedier parts, and also, with a very strong kind of the anarchy movement and all that sort of stuff, right? But at the same time, both these teams have done a very good job developing a brand that is quite commercial, and that is maybe where the Dortmund is quite a commercialized club, and it's the only club in Germany that's on the stock exchange. right? So you have that too, and I think that they almost they're trying to say that they're not commercialized, but they are. And that is like, that's where I always kind of, sometimes I have to roll my eyes when they try to differentiate themselves from Bayern Munich, who are probably even in many ways are more traditional than either one of those teams.
I find it quite interesting when we talk about commercial tactics, and I suppose what's often presented as a bit of a soft sell, and sometimes I feel like saying, yeah, I read the Deloitte Money Report too.
Yes.
I've seen the statistics and the numbers, and like I think you and I may have even said this to each other, but it's like you're doing more than shaking hands and kissing babies, right? When you have that kind of commercial revenue coming in, and I don't blame anybody for that, because this is the game that's been created, and these clubs did not create it. Maybe Uli Hoeneß might have done in German football context, but you have no choice but to kind of to tread this path now. So it's very interesting, and it's I don't think there's a right answer. I don't think there's necessarily a right way to behave, and I would never criticize an executive for the way they sort of tread this line. But it is compelling to watch as sort of theatre, press conference theatre, we can call it, I guess.
Dortmund have 190,000 members. That's hard to please. Bayern announced 318,000 members now in their latest AGM. That's it. It is, there's a lot of voices inside these clubs that you have to appease. It's very tricky. But yeah, let's move on to the actual stuff that happened on the field. Let's talk about Bayern first here. They win.
Yes, they did. They did indeed, yes.
Against Heidenheim. And that's great. Kane with another fantastic performance. He's now sitting on 17 goals. Although, and we're going to talk about Guirassy in a bit, he's not quite as efficient as Guirassy. He scores every 52 minutes. Guirassy is at every 45. Just wanted to point that out here. So Kane, once again, fantastic. Seb, at some point, Stefan, you and I need to sit down and really do a deep dive into Harry Kane and all the things that he has done at Bayern Munich, because that's worth an entire podcast. So I don't want to dwell on that too much, because I do want to talk about Heidenheim, because they go into the Allianz Arena, they go down 2-0, they make it 2-2, put up a really good fight. I know you planning something on Frank Schmidt. So I kind of want to talk about Heidenheim here, and the fact that they have done really well this season. It's been a joy to watch, because I had them go down, 18th, done. But they play such well-structured football. And we've seen Darmstadt at the Allianz, and we've seen Bochum at the Allianz, 7-0 and 8-0, right? It never felt like it would be like this with Heidenheim at all.
No, and I'm not just saying this because I'm 40 hours away from interviewing him, but enormous credit to Frank Schmidt for what he's done, because I think we can get onto the tactics later, but I think when you're a Darmstadt or a Heidenheim, when you're a club of that size and you go to the Allianz Arena, I think it's really easy to fall into a little bit of a day out mode. And this isn't just true in Germany; it's true in all the major leagues where there are superpowers. And I think especially when you go when you go 2-0 down and you've conceded, I mean, the first goal is of ludicrous quality from Kane. I watched it back just before we started recording, and I don't think there's anything you can do defensively about that. It's just too good. Like the heart in Heidenheim, and the fact that even when they're in adverse situations, the level of organisation within their defence without the ball never really falters. Also, I was having a little look through some of the Opta data at the end of the weekend, particularly relating to kind of the speed of ball movement up the pitch and how many touches it's required, how many touches teams are using in attacking moves. And on the one hand, you could say that Heidenheim are a direct team. On the other hand, like there's a lot of accuracy in their attacking football too. It's quite rudimentary, and it gets to the point quickly, should we say. There's a lot of precision too, and I think underpinning that organisation, yes, but also work rate, which when you get to November, Manu, and you're 2 down in Munich, and you think, international break in 60 minutes time, let's ease off a little bit and sit behind the ball. They didn't do that, and I think they've won. I too thought they'd go down, but I think they're very likable in a way. They're a human football team, and there's all these little stories. That the player that's really kind of captured my imagination is it's not particularly original, but Jan Niklas Beste. Just because I think I'm a sucker for a player that I don't know, who plays with a kind of a level of quality that I didn't know he possesses. Tim Kleindienst knew he was going to do quite well, and it's sort of like, that sort of that forward who sits at the top of the Zweite Bundesliga and the kind of the bottom half of the Erste Bundesliga. Like, I think we've seen that before. I don't know what we can call that. Maybe the Niklas Füllkrug dynamic, maybe. But yeah, I really like watching them play, and I also really admire the fact that outside of that game against Augsburg, when they got an absolute battering, they've been very competitive, more so than I thought they would be.
Yeah, I thought so too. I mean, I think that they're very well structured. They have. You can see Schmidt's handwriting all over this team, and I think it's to his credit that he managed to take the system that he's obviously perfected in the second Bundesliga over many years. I think he's always only played there and coached there. He was at some lower level teams, right? But he's been there for over a decade now.
He's been there since 2008.
2008. So yeah.
So he's the longest serving manager in German football history.
But he's played there before.
He played there. He was actually born in Heidenheim too.
Yeah.
So
he's Heidenheim. I mean,
he is the mayor of Heidenheim. Yeah.
He's the mayor of Heidenheim. It's and I don't think there's ever going to be a Heidenheim after Frank Schmidt.
No. Not sure.
But it's just the way that there's a well-known documentary called Trainer, and Frank Schmidt plays a big role in that, right? I think he came out around 2013, 2014 about coaching in Germany. And he's, I think, maybe the only survivor of that in terms that he's still with that very same club. But you just see the handwriting. And I seen them a few years ago. They played Bayern Munich in the DFB Pokal, a game that ended 5-4 for Bayern Munich. And, even in that game, they just stuck to their guns. They played their structured football. They never gave up when they went down goals. And ultimately, yes, they went out, but still it was a very spirited performance, and you saw it with this one too. And there's certain players that are just typical Heidenheim that kind of fit Schmidt's persona. I think of someone like Leonard Maloney, who's now a U.S. men's national team player, right? Born and raised in Berlin, but now plays
Father's American, I think.
Father's American, yes.
Yeah.
But is eligible for the United States, and let's be honest, he's not going to play for Germany because, I don't think the talent level is there. But he is such a hardworking player, and he does give something extra to the team. And he sits there as the sole number 6 and puts in such an incredible work rate every single game. And, this team is full of players like that. They kind of remind me...
A team of Leonard Maloney's is what you...
Well, they kind of remind me of when Union Berlin went up, right?
Yeah,
we're going to talk about Union Berlin in a little bit, but there is a sense here that they are much bigger than the sum of their parts, and that's because everyone buys into what Schmidt is selling. And if you play into that system and you put in a very hard work rate, they run 5 kilometers more than Bayern did in this particular game, right? And that just shows you that they know what it takes to actually survive in the Bundesliga. If they survive in the Bundesliga, that would be the club's biggest success after promotion.
It's interesting you bring up Maloney, because to me, think back to that game that Heidenheim, when they beat Union 1-0, and I remember watching Maloney. It was just before he got his call up, and I think, like, if you weren't watching properly, you'd say he's just a stopper, right? He's not. He could pass the ball a little bit, but like, he's not considered a ball player. Even though actually, when he was a bit younger, there wasn't, it wasn't John Stones necessarily, but he had a kind of artisanal quality to his ball carrying. But he actually really plays 2 roles for that Heidenheim team at the same time. Like, he's number 6, but he's really a third centre half for most of the game. And there's a lot of discipline involved in that. It's not just about being a big hulking body who gets in the way and who wins aerial duels and, can repel attacks and deal with an opposition shelling the penalty box. Like there's a real discipline to plugging up holes in the middle of the pitch, and he's done that incredibly well. And he too is a credit to his manager. And I feel like I wrote about this at the time. Like it's a huge deal for Heidenheim to have a senior international footballer. It's an amazing accomplishment, and I don't think this is necessarily. I think this is a problem that's been created by the game over many decades, and that you and I are the same age. And when I was growing up, the player winning an international cap was a moment, right? It was a huge deal. Like it was. They weren't just handed out charitably. Whereas now, I think like in an era where there are so many games and you need a big squad and you just need to know all of your options and that kind of stuff, I think we can become a little bit blasé about what it means to become an international, and also the journey that precedes that. And Leonard Maloney is a great example of that. To go from where he was and where Heidenheim were, and to come into this league and to be sufficiently impressive within a side who are so overwhelmed financially, resource-wise, that you stand out. That's a real accomplishment. And yeah, for Leonard Maloney, of course, but Frank Schmidt too, because it shouldn't happen. There should be no one in the Bundesliga, this team.
It reminds me of when 1860 went up after the 93-94 season, and 94-95 was their first year. And the big deal that was made when 1860 signed their first player to a $1 million Deutschmark contract, Piotr Nowak. And the first time they had a national team player, which was Bernd Meyer the following season, the goalkeeper. He was the third keeper for the German national team, and how big of a deal that was. And Heidenheim kind of brings me back to that. And also kind of like the work ethic too that 1860 had. And I mean, Union Berlin is the other good example, right? To just stay in the league and survive in the league actually for quite some time. And obviously then at some point they grew and became bigger, and they lost their ethos, which then also turned to their downfall, which is of course also maybe something we need to discuss about Union Berlin. But I looked at the Bundesliga match facts, Seb, and the air distance covered by every team, and Heidenheim sit first with 1,352.5 kilometers covered. They are ahead of Hoffenheim, and they are ahead of Union Berlin. That tells you everything you need to know. Bayern Munich is second, last is Darmstadt, which
is quite damning.
That is quite damning when you're a team that needs to survive in the Bundesliga.
Yeah.
But Heidenheim are also third in intensive runs with 8,318. First is Wolfsburg, second is Frankfurt. That doesn't surprise me. Frankfurt is a very hard-working team. And Heidenheim is second in sprints as well with 2,697, just ahead of Bayern Munich with 2,650. I mean, that's not a shocker either. Wolfsburg are first in that statistic. But, all of this, what I'm saying, underlines how hard this team is working every single match day to just survive in the league.
Yeah, and I suppose with that comes a caveat about longevity, just because what happens if, not necessarily injuries, but what happens when the season catches up with you? What happens when your morale gets bruised? Or what happens when, we're in February or March? But I feel like viewing them from that perspective or in those terms is a little bit churlish, just because, well, that's hypothetical. That's not what's happening at the moment. At the moment, the league is very congested, so the positions are almost worthless. But the teams who they haven't really been considered at any point to be a team in crisis. Obviously, we know we're going to talk about Union, but Cologne clearly, Mainz. Let's see. Just because one win is great, but let's see where they are in a few weeks' time. Darmstadt, you've talked about. Bochum, not great. There's a few teams down there who, yes, absolutely, that you'd worry about, and it's kind of amazing that they're not one of them at the moment. Like
but
I do.
would they be in crisis if they would be down there?
No,
I don't
not at
think
all.
so.
Not at all. Like I just mean in terms of crisis is completely the wrong word. I just mean that like I didn't expect us to be in November and me saying, well, I think they'll probably survive, because that's Heidenheim surviving the Bundesliga this season is kind of like Heidenheim winning the Bundesliga this season. Like I would equate it to the same level of achievement, or at least like finishing in the Champions League places.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They have been a great story, absolutely, and one that I'm really curious about your article on The Athletic about Frank Schmidt when it comes out. I think you will have a lot to chew on there once you talk to him. But Seb, we also need to talk about the other really good story in the Bundesliga. Yeah, let's talk about VfB Stuttgart next, because when you look at their shot efficiency, they're just plus 0.1. There's been such an incredible oil machine, but thank God their talisman striker Sergio Guirassy is back. His shot efficiency is 6+1. Shot efficiency, Seb, is essentially just like the XG outperformance of XG, right, from the Bundesliga match fact. Even without Guirassy, though, Seb, they've been an incredible team to watch.
Yeah, probably in a way that some of the results don't reflect, Manu, because I think there are two ways of looking at Stuttgart. The first is obviously where they're on the table and their performances, wins and losses, sorry. The second is the quality of their football. And if you take Guirassy out of it, and obviously for good reason, he attracted an awful lot of attention through the early part of the season, and deservedly so, because he's finished so well. But I've loved watching them play. Like, the axis behind him, I really like. The Führich, Milo, Silas dynamic behind him is fascinating, just because three such different players. Every time I see you, I bore on about Angelo Stiller, who actually, I know we're going to talk about Germany later. I thought was a little bit unlucky not to get called up.
Well, especially after Führich Führich is becoming a father, right? So he can't make it. And they called up Bremmel instead, and I think that would have been a good point to call up Stiller.
Yeah, well, also Felix Metscher drops out as well with injury. And Stiller, to me, he's still 22, so he's got, plenty of time. I just think the way he's playing for Hennes' Stuttgart really suits what Nagelsmann want Germany to be, just in terms of how progressive his passing is. He passes the ball forward and through the lines, like the perfect Nagelsmann number 6. And he's been terrific. And I just think the way they move the ball compared to what they were pre-Hennes, and how they would kind of sit and cower behind the ball and wait to just really just use their speed. There was very little else to them, actually, compared to now. And also remember, this is a team that lost Endo in the summer, and given how important he was to that team. So they've rebuilt the middle of their side, and the performances and the quality of the football. We talked about efficiency. This game, the amount of chances, like the Führich chance that I pushed wide of the right post, I think. When he went through on goal, he just side-footed wide of Köbel's far post. Köbel had a good game too. Like their chance creation was just superb, and they're so entertaining. And Guirassy is just part of that story. But I think I like this game because it showed that they weren't just about a single forward scoring at a phenomenal rate, which is kind of like, for people that haven't really been watching them, that's been the accusation, which is quite annoying. I don't know why I get annoyed about that on Stuttgart's behalf. I could not possibly live further away from Stuttgart in Germany, up in Hamburg, but they look terrific. Hey, Milo can play. Love him.
I saw him at that the relegation playoffs for the first time live, because I went to both those games, and it was impressive.
Just far too good for Hartsfeld that night, right?
The entire team was far too good. It's true. Over the full 180 minutes, it was. That's the first time when you could tell that the Stuttgart side was going to do something special this year.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? And I think it's a measure of Hennes' impact of that. When they fell into that relegation spot almost by chance, I think every Hartsfeld fan thought, no chance. absolutely no chance. It's too much pace, there's too much organisation, there's too much quality, and it's exactly what it proved. It was never close as a game. There was that sort of brief period in the first half of the second leg at the Volkspark where, you know, things looked a little bit dicey, but I don't know.
There was, when you take the Hoeneß table from last season, I think they were 4th in the Bundesliga standings.
Yeah.
Which, surprise, is exactly where they are now.
Yeah, just terrific. A really good story. And also, like, I feel like, I don't know quite how I quantify this, but it does just feel like a better Bundesliga when Stuttgart is strong. It's a really cool, loud terrace down there. I went for the first time for the relegation game and it was just really impressed. Very dusty stadium though during the renovation.
It's going to be terrific when it's done. It's terrific. Yeah. It's going to be terrific when it's done. But that stadium, as great and beautiful as it is from the outside with that beautiful roof, and you know, it hasn't had a facelift since 2006 for the World Cup. So definitely overdue. But the Cannstatter Kurve, as you mentioned, that's one of the best stands in the Bundesliga period.
Yeah, well, I was the first time I was there. The first time I actually met our friend Matt Ford in real life, and he was telling me about it. And yeah, I've got a few pictures on my wall here at home of the whole terrace in flames. It's just an amazing spectacle and so loud, so loud. But a great place. But you know, they've got a team that does justice to the environment, and yeah, I could watch them play football all day. They're just whether they're scoring goals or just creating chances, they're a delight.
The question is for me, like, where does this end, right? Because like, I said they're 4th, they're actually 3rd in the standings, just ahead of Leipzig. Dortmund now out of the top 4, which again, too bad Stefan isn't here because, you know, he's
get into him about that. Yeah,
we get the butcher. We can get to Dortmund after the international break. Let's leave poor Eden Terzic alone for just a week, because this is such a good story. And Stuttgart, obviously, it, you know, the way it all materializes right now, it looks like a title race between Leverkusen and Bayern. Right there, it's just so far ahead of everyone else at the moment. But the Stuttgart side, I guess, what is the ceiling for this team? Because, you know, they now have an international break, which means they can heal up a little bit. Führig isn't going, or maybe going. I think that he's questionable, right? It all is a touch and go thing.
Did his partner give birth today, or is she about to, or?
It's just,
I saw the story, but I didn't read it.
For properly. Now remaining in Stuttgart, but there is hope that maybe he's going to make the second game. He remains part of the squad. Bremmel was the
he got called up today. Yeah.
Just in case. But like at the same time, you know, if he doesn't go, Hoeneß is probably not going to be sad about that either. It's just, you know, what is the ceiling for this team? Because like, as I said, like, their standings last year, if you just take the Hoeneß table, they were firmly in the top 4. Is this where they're going to end up? Or is Dortmund going to muscle their way back in there?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple of variables in here. Like we've talked about, so Führig, there's a sort of tendency to think of Führig as being very young. It's mid-20s, 26, 25, I think.
27,
so he's not the youngest,
I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
But Milo Stiller, 21, 22.
Yep.
I thought actually one of the great stories of the weekend was Dan Axel Zagadou playing well. Like, I was lovely because he's
against Dortmund.
You wouldn't wish that on anybody. That sort of the last sort of 3 or 4 years has just been horrendous for him. And he looked like the player that was being, I get just across the course of a game, but he looked like the player that was being sort of connected to like Manchester United and that kind of club, like left-footed ball carrying centre half who just has this sort of very regal quality on the ball. He's still 24, which is amazing if you think about it. Because he seems to be around forever. And you've got other really young players. Silas is 24, 25. Alexander Newell, I know, is 27, but still young for a goalkeeper. If they can keep him there full time, that would be very interesting.
Yeah.
Guirassy, I think, I don't think Guirassy is there next season, because
you got it. Yeah, I mean, the exit clause hurts. Because,
Exactly.
if you don't have the exit clause, you have to sell.
Yeah.
Like Frankfurt did with Kolomuani. But with
Yeah.
the exit clause in place, 20 million is not going to be enough to replace him.
No. So I suppose there's a double-ended question two possible answers. One, like, how much more is there from some of these players, particularly some of the younger ones? Also, how good can the recruitment be when these inevitable things happen? And to be honest with you, there's good reason to believe that it will be pretty decent. I mean, I got pelted on Twitter for saying this, but like, I think Max Mittelstadt has had a really good season too. Like, in the little bits that I've seen him, I think he's played really, really well. And I love a fullback who can invert and who can play in the middle of the pitch. And I think he's done that to a really high standard. I think so. I don't know how old he is. I think he's mid-20s too, but good player. So there's lots of little stories, and I think you have also, and I don't think this should be disregarded, you have a lot of players playing well at the same time and seemingly feeding off each other. And I'm curious to see what happens when that's not the case, or when a couple of people get injured, or if, for instance, if they lost, I don't know, Karazor in the middle of the pitch, who I think is also
so
been really,
good for
really
them.
good. Yeah, it's been so important. Then what does that do to Stiller, for instance? Like, how expressive does he become in that situation? How do those attacking pieces who so often this season have got the ball in like one-on-one situations or in space, how does that affect the supply? These are the kind of questions I think Stuttgart will have to answer probably after the winter break.
Oh, Hiroki Ito, who has been outstanding as a centre
Really
back
good.
as well.
Really good.
You look at Stuttgart's underlying numbers, when it comes to key passes and like pass completion rate and all that sort of thing. I think they have like 5 or 6 guys in all those statistics in the top 20.
That's outrageous.
It's outrageous. Yeah, I went on
That is
Scout to
outrageous.
write an article on Angelo Stiller, and I'm like, oh yeah, his numbers are outstanding, and so is the numbers of 4 or 5 other guys.
Yeah, it's,
which is like, just, you look at that and you're like, wow, this entire team is just playing so well, right? And then that what does that tell you? Well coached.
well coached.
Right?
System that suits the players. Like, you give players a system in which they're able to actually express themselves and show how good they are, which sounds like a really simple thing, but there's just so many coaches that don't do that. I mean, there's coaches that won European Cups that don't do that, who are, mentioning no names, but now managing Roma.
Who could that be? But I think Sebastian Hoeneß gets Stuttgart, with his dad being, he was born in Munich, but his father was the sporting director for a long time at Stuttgart, right? And then also, of course, the Hoeneß family is from Ulm originally.
They really? I didn't know that.
Dieter, Uli, they're all from Ulm, which is of course bordering. Neu-Ulm is in Bavaria, Ulm is in Baden-Württemberg, so it's right on the border. And that also tells you that he is someone who gets the place, and I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that, isn't it? Because I think it's kind of sorry, kick the desk. It's kind of important in terms of building a team which fits the expectation of the club, which is it's a huge deal. Like, even if you're successful or not, I think it's you've got to play in the right way to properly connect with your fan base, and clearly that's happening. So I'm going to Ulm tomorrow. Yeah, armed with a little bit of local knowledge that I'll bore my wife with.
You're going to go to the home of the Hoeneß clan.
Yeah, this is it. I'll say it loudly on the Deutsche Bahn, just so that everyone knows. No, I know what I'm talking about. Little do they know, I didn't know it 12 hours earlier.
Seb, before we leave, I want to touch on something that we discussed before the pod, because I actually thought it was quite interesting. And that's Union Berlin. So many people ask us, what's going wrong with Union Berlin? Yeah. And I actually thought that they played pretty decently well against Leverkusen. It's just, it's Leverkusen. They're the best team in Germany. And yes, I say that without any sort of judgmental saying towards Bayern Munich or whatever. I actually firmly believe that Leverkusen at this very moment are the best team in Germany.
100%.
They might actually be one of the best teams in Europe.
Manu.
Period. Just watch them play. It's very difficult to disagree with this. And I thought they play quite well. It's Leverkusen. Bayern Munich would have probably lost that game. So, and I thought they played quite well in the Champions League as well, midweek against Napoli. Union Berlin are now last in the standings, and I get the sense what really went wrong here is that they overcooked it on the transfer market. While they were always bigger than the sum of their parts, at the moment they're just smaller than the sum of the parts. And there's too many players, Geraldo Becker, who are just not buying into the system at the moment. Although in Becker's defense, he has played quite well against Napoli. But Seb, I think for Fischer, this international break, and Union Berlin have come out and said, look, we're going to work with Fischer on fixing this. This international break must be quite welcome to just sit down and try to get the chemistry going again.
Yeah, it's a hugely important time. So coming straight out of the international break, and they've got Augsburg at home, and
must win.
Yeah, but even with Augsburg's new manager bounce, and they have been a little bit better, right? You got to win that. You got to score in Copenhagen, and you got to win the game. And if you do that, I think it becomes very, very easy to turn the page in the season. I know it's a strange thing to say given the sequence, but I'm not that worried about them. I just think there's... You talked about how they tried to do too much too soon, and they've sort of, I suppose, overloaded their Christmas tree with baubles, would be the kind of the seasonal metaphor that we'd use here. But it's a very fair point. And if you look at their incomings, and if you look at... They strengthen their side in a way that it feels like they bought players because they could, rather than necessarily because they fitted their needs. And I can't think, with the exception of probably Robin Gersons for the first 3 or 4 games, I think there's a single player who arrived over the summer that I've actually been that impressed in any way with.
Yeah.
I think Leonardo Bonucci had a pretty good game in Napoli. I thought he played pretty well.
And against Real.
Yeah, yes, he did. Yes, sorry, you're quite right. He also did play very well against Real. But Fofana, no, not really. I don't. I think he'll be a good player at some point. I think he's not quite ready. I think we also saw that sort of that. Although obviously they made amends afterwards, that moment with Fischer, which led to a suspension, was so un-Union-like.
Yeah,
it was really concerning. As Kroll, not for me really. I don't think Lucas Toussaint is barely played. I think if he has more than 250 minutes this season, I'd be surprised. I don't know what I think about Brendan Aronson. I'm a little bit poisoned against him because of his time in the Premier League, where I thought he was quite lightweight.
Yeah,
it wasn't physical enough, and I think that he's talented, definitely. I'm just unconvinced about his role at Union. I think he has a role to play somewhere in the Bundesliga, but in this system, I don't know.
I think Brendan rose too quick. That a very expensive move from Salzburg to Leeds. And we see this with US players. They believe they're hyped too soon, quite often.
Really, I haven't heard that before.
You look at Gio.
Yeah,
and then social media explodes whenever they do something small. Or Christian Pulisic.
Yes,
and social media just explodes and look how amazing he is. It's well, he's also missed 60% with injuries.
I feel like that's a really hard gig for someone though, Manu, because I think that...
Oh, it is. It is.
To be... I remember when Pulisic came through at Dortmund, and I've seen what you're talking about and what you're referencing there, and the kind of the reaction to it, and it's that is a hard thing to shoulder, I guess, to kind of play under those circumstances. It's nobody's fault, it's just the way of it, and it's also a reaction to kind of a lot of the snobbery that Americans have had to deal with. From sort of European fans over the years, and I completely understand why they retaliate to it. It would annoy the hell out of me too. But then the player gets put in that situation. So Aronson, I don't know. We said before we started recording that I think that Rani Khedira being available full time makes a huge difference to this team.
Yeah.
He's last season. There were periods during last season where I thought he was among the best defensive midfielders in Germany. And without him, that midfield, which is just so compact, denies space so well, it's just not the same at all. I think they're okay. I think I like the way that they're interesting to see what you think about this. I like how quickly Union stood behind their manager, because to not do that in that situation would have felt a little bit of a betrayal of who they were, and of the kind of the things that seem to matter to the club and the things we're told matter to the club and the fans and the organisation. So to see it as a kind of, no, he's the manager and he's staying. Like, if that holds true, then that's a feather in their cap. And Urs Fischer is an outstanding organizer of football teams, and I have no doubt that it will get a lot better quickly. But it's still a good moment, I think.
It kind of reminds me of what Freiburg did with Streich, right? And then Mainz did with Klopp. When they went down with Klopp, they kept them, right? I think twice, actually. And so, obviously Fischer isn't the issue here. I think they overcooked it on the transfer market. I really do. I think they brought in too many players that didn't buy yet into the system, or maybe will never. We completely forget the fact Kevin Volland is there, for example, right?
Kevin Volland, yes.
But like, these are all players that, it's kind of like when you play Football Manager on a cheat code and you just buy everyone, and it just doesn't work. And you kind of betray the system that worked for you previously. It kind of feels like that. It's too much of a good thing, right? I think overeating on candy is another good analogy you brought up there.
Same thing.
And now you feel sick and sluggish. Like, in retrospect, hindsight is 2020, but I think letting Jordan go on loan to Gladbach for Fofana is a huge mistake.
Jordan, I know Jordan didn't score a lot of goals, but
so
Jordan's
important.
a problem for players to defend against. And I remember seeing him in person. Like, he's one of the most awkward forwards in Germany. And actually that combination, I have to believe that there's a correlation between his departure and Geraldo Becker's decline. Just because I felt like Becker often used Jordan as a kind of reference point for whatever he was doing on the pitch, and it worked. Like, Jordan occupied people. Becker was absolutely brilliant at exploiting space, and an absolute nightmare for a lot of defenders. Where when he would make those runs into the channels and he'd drift wide away from Becker, and someone would have to go for him, and invariably it would be a mismatch because Becker's quicker than electric current, pretty much. And he does not look like the same player. Look, last season people thought he was, worth 35, 40 million euros and heading to some Premier League team. Looks nothing like that now. Am I right in thinking he hasn't scored this season?
No, he has scored. Let me just double check that.
Okay. Maybe not in the Bundesliga.
Not in the Bundesliga, but he's definitely scored. He scored in the Champions League.
Right. Okay. Fine. Okay. I don't remember that. That's how.
I mean, he hasn't.
If it didn't leave an impression on me, did it count? I mean,
he hasn't. He scored 3 goals and 2 assists in 16 games across all competitions. 2 in the Champions League, none in the Bundesliga. And you know what? That kind of underlines your point, though, because he is a player who plays off someone, and that also kind of makes me think that he's just not a difference player. He's a good player, but he does need someone who has an impact around him to be a good player himself. And that's sort of lacking at the moment. You can't expect...
Isn't that what you'd say about the whole of Union, Manu? Like, in terms of those individual players, there are very few players there individually who can make a difference. And that's not meant to be disrespectful. It's just who they are. They are a unit. And we were saying before we started recording, I was listening to Christoph Biermann talking to Raphael Honigstein on their podcast, and he was talking about how some of the players there it seemed like they've forgotten that they are they're part of a mechanism, or that some of the sort of the dirtier work that Fischer had them doing a year ago, some of them maybe think it's a little bit beneath them now that they're Champions League players. And I haven't played the game to a high enough level to know that, to know what it looks like when that happens, but it's pretty reasonable diagnosis, it seems.
Yeah, well, either have forgotten or never learned it, right? That's the new guys in the squad, and I think that's a really accurate assessment. The way what made Union Berlin successful was not playing pretty football. It was never pretty. They cheated the system by outscoring the XG, right? And I don't buy a lot into XG. Look at Stuttgart and what they do, or Guerassi rather, what he does, or like any successful team in German football, including Bayern Munich, heavily outscore their XG, right?
Yep.
That's just what good teams do. The problem is that Union Berlin played like a good team, outscoring the XG, and now they're not. And that is because they're playing, a lot of players are not buying into what made this team successful in the first place. And I think ultimately they will be fine because they crash out of the Champions League. They will make some adjustments in the winter. Urs Fischer will get cooking, and then they'll finish mid-table somewhere, and that will be fine. It will be a year of regression, which was probably going to come anyways. But it is.
One of the interesting patterns with Fischer is if you look at their turnover and the kind of the average amount of time that a player has spent at the club. I think for some of these players, we're beyond it. I looked it up last season, and it was about 18 months, 2 years, like that for sort of first team regulars. I wonder if there's a little bit of a lifespan to his style of coaching in terms of for how long you can push a player to play in a certain way, and whether, like, instead of the renewal that they had, like year on year, obviously they went out, they had to find like a new centre forward every year for 4 years, like. Awani, and they brought in Becker and Jordan. This year it didn't really happen. It felt like they were building on existing foundations, and it didn't really lose anything either. And you wonder whether kind of that's part of the chemistry as much as what they added.
Yeah, and that the turnover of players going out wasn't big enough. They should have probably sold Becker in the summer.
Yeah, I agree. Like, love watching him, but also like, how is Becker now? 29, 28?
Yeah. This was the year to get money for him.
Yeah, it's his prime years. Like, I'm a big fan of kind of keeping a defense together. That's fine, but I just think and their dual pass, their recruitment has been generally excellent since promotion. So I think it's kind of, and also. You cannot plan for qualifying for the Champions League if you're in your Berlin. You just can't until it happens.
Or Europe, period.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
Who was the player they let go last year? The blonde boy who used to play midfield. What was his name? He scored the disallowed goal in Amsterdam, and I've completely forgotten his name.
Such as the turnover at Union Berlin.
I don't think this is the very best bit of audio content. But,
that's fine. We're doing this pretty much, on the back of the
Thursby, maybe.
Yeah,
was that him? I'm gonna look it up. Morten Thursby. I liked him. I didn't think he should have gone.
But that's the way of Union Berlin. The turnover is high.
It is. Yeah.
Seb, unfortunately, we're pretty much out of time because we could probably talk about Union Berlin and remember their glorious Europa League run forever. But before we go, 2 things. First of all, this show is brought to you by Bet Online. But second, what can you plug? Let us know where people can find you.
So, I write for The Athletic, so you can find me on there. Got a couple of interesting things coming up. I'm going to Heidenheim to interview Frank Schmidt on Wednesday morning. So that'll be due in the next few days. Got a couple of interviews lined up, which I can't quite talk about publicly yet, but they should be hopefully ones to look out for. And then, I don't know, I plug the fact that St. Pauli top of the Zweite Bundesliga, or the Zweite Bundesliga, the Hamburg is the capital city of Zweite Bundesliga football. I'm not sure.
You hope that's changing. Hamburg has Champions League football. It's just not a Hamburg-based team.
Yeah, Hamburg just don't play in it. But yeah, I mean, there is literally Champions League football in the city of Hamburg this season. So, and we'll take it, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to take what you can get. Programming note, guys. Obviously, we don't have a preview show because it's an international break, which also means this show comes out at a little bit of a different time than usual. We will have your bonus show and transfer show as always. Stefan will be hopefully back if we don't lose him at the Früh, Seb, at Kölsch Carnival. Thoughts and prayers.
Can't believe you let him do that.
Can't believe it either. We'll never see him again. Officially, he's there to interview Alonso for Transfermarkt.
Yeah,
we've
we'll
lost
see.
him at Früh. Forever gone. Gone too soon. So thoughts and prayers to Stefan, who's somewhere stuck in Köln. But he'll be back, hopefully. And we'll be back soon with more. Until then, auf Wiedersehen.
Und kein Ende in Sicht.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.